Hello everyone, welcome and welcome back. My name is Jennifer Irene and I'm here to talk about the full moon upcoming this Sunday, and the moon is in Pisces. The sun and Mercury are in Virgo, and it's also an eclipse. It's a partial lunar eclipse. So this is a lot of energy. We also have some really beautiful aspects. I feel that this is quite a benevolent eclipse, a benevolent moon. I'm going to share more about the details why. We have really beautiful sextiles. We have semi-sextiles that are like windows of opportunity for us to use. We don't have a lot of harsh aspects, and I feel that the general energy is quite uplifting. But of course, benevolent doesn't equal easy. So I do also feel the challenge happening already, and there's already so many crazy synchronicities happening. Like, I think this is just gonna get more and more and more now every day. But I wanna share with you something really crazy that happened yesterday. This is a story that I really wanna share with you because it's so crazy to me how life sometimes brings things together in this way. And it's mind-baffling how fitting the synchronicities are and how the symbolism just shows up like that. Like, for me, is crazy. And I have 100,000 stories like that all the time, but sometimes there's these moments where I'm like, wow, this is pretty incredible. I can't wait to share. But first, so you know what's going on, let me share about the aspects. We have the moon in Pisces, conjunct, of course, the North Node. That's why it's an eclipse. We have on the opposite side of that the sun in Virgo, and we also have Mercury there in conjunction. So already this full moon is bringing us a lot of movement, a lot of talking about things, a lot of processing, and a lot of like cerebral action. We have a sextile on either side of that sun, meaning that it's a trine to the moon. And so on one side we have Jupiter in Cancer, and on the other side we have Lilith in Scorpio. In between those we have two semi-sextiles. So on one side we have Venus in Leo, and the other side we have Mars in Libra. It's already very interesting because they're in the signs that are ruled by each other, vice versa. So Leo ruled by Mars, where Venus is, and Libra ruled by Venus, where Mars is. Just a quick reminder that you can support me in making this beautiful content for you by sharing it with your friends, giving the video a like, and subscribing to the channel. That will greatly support a small channel that sometimes it's very difficult to get into the algorithms to be seen, and I would be able to continue making these videos for you. If you would like to get to know me and my offerings, I will leave all the information below. I'm a transformational mentor, also working one-on-one with clients. If you are a creative, empathic human craving to nourish the connection to your heart, your inner clarity, your vision, to answer questions about your life, to seek support and guidance in transformational periods and spiritual changes that you may be going through, then I would be super happy to support you. I have different tools and modalities that I work with, and I'm super happy to find something that suits you and your needs. So let me share about what happened yesterday. At this time, there's a very loud construction where I live, so to work, sometimes I have to go outside of the house somewhere, and yesterday I decided to go to the library. And I did not know on that exact day that there would be a television channel there to make an interview, which started around like 30 minutes after the time that I arrived. They were filming stuff like on different areas of the library. It was like quite far away from me. But then just as I was transitioning from my other tasks into really studying about this full moon, getting out my notes, getting the charts out, taking notes, and just really diving into all of the aspects, they came into the floor where I was, and just a couple meters next to me they set up their chairs and their cameras, and they were interviewing. So it was really, really interesting, the topics, and it was an interview about two students at school. The German school system was kind of the topic, and especially the like literature topics and the books that the students were being forced to read in school, and how the curriculum was kind of dealing with the topic of books and literature and culture in the school curriculum. Now this is already very interesting because Mars is in Libra, kind of a sign talking about art and culture, and that is where the action was like going towards. Venus is in Leo, which is all about self-expression, and the topic was like different authors and books and the stories that people were telling through their books, but also two people being interviewed telling their personal story, like their viewpoint, and expressing something about that topic. The moon being in Pisces is very interesting because Pisces is often associated with kind of like film and photography, and also making something that can then be distributed to like a large audience, this like kind of beyond just one personal story theme. They were talking about a collective, a systemic issue, and at the same time, on the other side, Virgo, the Sun and Mercury, they were really talking about the details of which book was on the curriculum and why was that good or not good, and kind of also mentioning like this daily experience that students have and what would really make school enjoyable, not only for the students but also culturally, what would make much more sense for students to really be dealing with in class. So they were talking about like the educational system, and they were talking about the details and about the whole discourse of it, and like this is a very Mercurian thing, right? But more specifically, a lot of what was being talked about was, for example, in literature, the fact that not so many female authors are being read, that not so many authors of like with a migration background, that their books are not being read, but that instead it's kind of like these very old classics like Romeo and Juliet, books that have basically been taught in school for like such a long time now, where there's kind of not been a change, there's not been an update. That's one of the things that was being mentioned in the interview, is that there's a lot of talk about digitalization and modernization in school systems, but then like why is this book curriculum not changed? And it's very interesting because specifically also Lilith being there in Scorpio with these other goddess archetypes, it's like bringing up the awareness also of authors that have written books under male pseudonyms, and that a lot of those things aren't really mentioned in class and are not really discussed, and that bringing the awareness of like things that have been repressed, that have been like marginalized, or minorities that have not really been taken into consideration, things that have just kind of like been there beneath the surface, and they're not being like brought up into the awareness of society through educating the students. On the other side of that, Jupiter in Cancer is really fitting because a lot of what they were saying was also mentioning how they feel about it, how it makes them feel, how it makes the students feel during class, and not only the books that were chosen, but how the structure is around analyzing that book, that they would really wish for more of a political discourse about a topic, and to connect the theme of the book with actual current events, and to have more of like discussions about it, and really understand why this book is even important and relevant right now, versus just analyzing the structure and having to answer rigid questions that they said it was, quote, boring, right? So Jupiter in Cancer also really, they're highlighting like that compassion. One of them also said that they have a migration background themselves, and it would really mean a lot to them to be able to read from authors like that. It really affects how they feel, and it changes the way we cultivate empathy. It changes how we think about the world and others. Schools, and especially, books and literature, are really an access point to how we form empathy. What we know and think and learn, and those things, those belief systems, those feelings, those emotions, they become our home, and they shape our values and our traditions. So this is very fitting for all of those areas. With this contrasting energy of Pisces on one side, with the moon, with our emotional world, and then on the other side Virgo and the sun, and this kind of intellectual understanding, and this rational way of thinking and talking and reflecting, plus Saturn retrograding right like in the last degrees of Pisces again, really highlighting the systemic relevance of this. It's just so fitting because we really need to understand these bigger changes that we want to induce in the world, right? These long-term changes of beliefs, of structures, like where are the little points, what are the daily things that actually are touching on shaping that in a longer sense? And it really highlights this important aspect, which is that these emotional topics about what we believe and how we've changed the way that we view the world in this new lens of understanding and awareness and this kind of spiritual dimension that has shifted for us, how do we really reflect that in the daily mundane things, in the everyday actions, and how do we really kind of root that into the material realm? So Virgo is really also about understanding like from where to root, where to plant the seed, where is the garden, where does the digesting happen, and all of those things. It's about understanding also how sovereignty is maintained, so to understand what influences what, and making sure that those influences are aligned with that opposite, with that Piscean energy, with that bigger unconditional field of awareness, of energy, the kind of bigger than life topics. And it's interesting because this was also reflected through like another lens that popped up in my life this week. Someone in my field raising awareness about the topic of tattooing, and specifically tribal tattoos, and this whole culture that has kind of formed around tribal tattooing, and a lack of awareness of the history and like specifically the pain points, the trauma, the effects of colonialism, of systemic racism, of slavery, and hundreds of years of oppression and stealing from other cultures that have been systemically oppressed to then kind of like steal their aesthetics when they now suddenly are becoming like cool again, but then also taking that and monetizing it and using something from a culture that is not your own, from people who still are trying to heal from what has happened to them in the past, and then just kind of like overlooking that and instead trying to make a profit off of it, which is like a continuation of the same mindset and the same worldview that has caused the pain in the first place. This colonial, capitalistic, egocentric view that specifically people from certain heritages, like Europeans, that seem to have this really strong embedded in the way that they think and view the world, and how highly problematic that is and causing like really strong imbalance in the whole globe. I think with this full moon we're really experiencing a lot of potential for cultivating our compassion, for really like shifting our awareness, and ultimately together collectively also shaping the direction that life goes into, that more spiritual, love-filled space. And at the same time, it's also right now a moment where we might be really confronted with this duality of like, yes, there is a higher perspective of we all are one and there should be no differences, and what's the point of differentiating between people's skin colors and this and that. How can we like hold that in our hearts, the idea also that we are all from Earth and we are all like indigenous from this planet, that we all have bodies that were born here, and this really lovely idea also where the North Node is, like where we want to go, right? We want to have more of that in our lives, in consciousness. And at the same time, this contrast of like, yes, but there are real life material things that need to be addressed. They are stored in the body. They need to be digested. They are in the cells. They need to be coming out and be taken out of the systems, so that those systems can actually move into that higher awareness. But we can't not do that step. It's like wanting to eat food without having it come out into the toilet and several hours later. You can't have one without having the other. So we also can't have all of these shifts in perspective and in our hearts and in our consciousness without also going through the process of repairing, the process of acknowledging, the process of honoring, changing a system, the process of rearranging, the process of listening, the process of really understanding the details of what is not longer okay and what has never been okay, and to stop bypassing that and to really, really listen because this is this duality, this is the balance of this spiritual life and also this real world material physical life. They are not separate. It's just different dimensions of the same thing, but we can't just erase dimensions. So we need to be looking at these real world material things in order to fully align with those beautiful spiritual teachings of we can all express ourselves freely and we can all choose to wear and do whatever we want. We also need to address and look through and go through the process of digesting those real world memories, those real material physical things that are happening and that are also being expressed. It's same with, like, for example, the money topic, which is like a hugely popular topic right now. A lot of people are feeling changes in the field and are really working through like their personal emotions about money. And that's exactly the point. You can't just start loving money and wanting to use it for good and wanting to invite abundance of money into your life, but not actually go through the emotions that you've been avoiding on a physical material world level, doing daily mundane stuff like looking at your bank account or understanding how to budget or really knowing like where you're spending your money and all of the steps of like where does it go from there and who is receiving it when you pay for this and what is the channel that you are receiving it from and all of the earthly real things that are connected with that. How are we like crafting these ideas in this like digital space, but how are they actually also connected to real world like material resources, you know, like mining for a Bitcoin, but how, like, what are we using to do that physically, you know? Which resources flow into doing that? Because it's not just an idea, it's actually an idea that has been physically made interactionable. Yeah, it's again, I mentioned this in the last video and it's still important, this awareness that the digital world is not separate from the physical world. And the clouds where we store all our data and our information is physical because it is a physical place where data is being stored. It's still part of the physical world. We cannot separate the physical life and the physical experience from the spiritual, airy dimension. And I think this really also fits with the Sabian symbols from this full moon, because where the Sun and Mercury are in Virgo, the Sabian symbol is in the zoo, children are brought face to face with an orangutan. And the keynote is written as a direct confrontation with the wild power of the nature within oneself. It's kind of like this, yeah, we're seeing this real physical material stuff that like we need, that is something that we can't just like completely bypass and overlook. But it's not just something awful that is like a problem. It's actually something really beautiful for us to also get to have and get to use and get to know. There's also a beautiful reason to have all of this material functioning and the body that needs to digest. There's so much positive that can come out of that. It's a beautiful, powerful, creative tool if we just understand how to actually honor it, how to actually interact. And where the moon is the Sabian symbol is in the quiet of his study, a creative experiences a flow of inspiration, keynote of reliance on an inner source of guidance as inspiration. And this is beautiful because we're also really in the state where we might feel these benevolent transits as well, these trines to Jupiter, to Lilith, these semi-sextiles to Venus and to Mars. We're feeling this, maybe it's like a motivation again, or we're feeling like a renewed sense of being willing to make a strategy and to understand that we cannot avoid these things, but also feeling more mature about it and feeling more reflected about it and feeling like it's not just a chore, but perhaps there's also a beauty to it. I think that's a feeling that I'm grasping here. It's not only a chore, but it's also a beauty. And that's also what I experienced yesterday when I had to leave my house, and instead of being all annoyed that I cannot work from home right now, I was reminded of the beauty and how much I enjoy actually walking through nature to get to a different space, and that I feel so inspired just from that, passing by a different street or a different park or a different tree and smelling something new, seeing something new, that all of that is part of my inspiration, and it actually feels really, really good for me to do that. So sometimes these life circumstances, they're also really pushing us to do the things that we forget that we actually enjoy. So when we can relax, when you can soften and not see life all the time as like doing something bad to you, but maybe also trying to search for what is the beautiful thing about this that maybe you forgot, and going through the experience trying to look for those perspectives, and while also really understanding like what needs to be addressed here on the physical level. I feel that collectively there's also this notion right now of like art, and we also of course have this with Venus in Leo and Mars in Libra, this understanding that what is art actually for? Yeah, it's not maybe just like something to present to someone. It's not just something to finish and to show. It's not just like, creating something on Instagram so that you have a post, but it's actually remembering why art is something enjoyable. What is the feeling during the art making? Why is that something special? Why is that something wanted? And remembering to connect to that sense of creation, not from this outcome-based perspective, but flowing more into the in it perspective, the in between, before something is finished, and allowing the experience itself to have value during it. With Jupiter in Cancer highlighted through this trine and the sextile, we also really have the topic of like our safety net and the community really coming together to maybe not just support each other through like high fives and likes and non-physical things like respect or admiration, but also actually physically aligning ourselves with support. So how can the community come together to actually support someone's dream? And ideally everyone's dream in the community will be supported by everyone else in the community, and also physically. Ultimately that will require that we shift our resources and that we kind of like divide them in maybe new ways than they have been. But again, if we want to reach to that like vision of like, yeah, we want a different world, a different life, the new world, the new age, that's what we have to do. There needs to be a rearranging. We can't just always be scared of that rearranging happening, yeah? But just feeling into that perspective that maybe I want to support someone actually physically. Like maybe I want to offer my physical strength and do something to support that person. Maybe it's a friend or a family member or whatever, a stranger. And maybe you want to support someone financially who's working on a project, or maybe you want to support someone by making a connection or sharing a contact, or letting them borrow something that they could use. So that in turn, when we all do that for each other collectively, we will help each other be more fulfilled, be more successful through our emotional fulfillment, and also helping to physically redistribute all of these tools and resources that we also have to remember some people have much more access to those resources than other people. So it's really, really crucial to be sharing those, because then it can happen much faster and much better and much more fairly, that all of us have a chance, a real chance of being able to express ourselves, of being able to make art, of sharing our gifts with the world, of creating this really cool project or idea or whatever it is that someone wants to do. The sextile and trine to Lilith in Scorpio, of course, really brings up what are those shadow topics there, yeah? Why are we still hesitant? What are we afraid of? Where is the systemic block, like the problem that maybe makes it hard for people to even see something, or if they, maybe they feel like they can't do or they shouldn't do it in that way. Yeah, like where is the actual corruption, where has the original idea or the original thought been kind of twisted and distorted, and it's just not like what it actually should be when we think about what we want, yeah, what actually feels good, because it is good, because it is nurturing. And we also have another aspect that I didn't mention yet, which is a trine between Venus and Ceres. Ceres is in Aries right now and it's retrograding, and this trine really shows me the highlight, the flow of really honoring the things that got you where you are, honoring what helped you, what supported you, and maybe giving something back, or really making an effort to have that gratitude be felt, kind of really nurturing the relations, nurturing the systems that do support you, but essentially like understanding where is your privilege and how can that system also support other people, not just you. Yeah, maybe giving back something that has helped you, maybe paying back a debt, or also offering something in return, or even just, mentioning to someone something that they did that really helped you. Like any of those things. I feel like the whole idea here is to really understand what has been able to nurture your individual path and take a moment to reflect upon that. I feel the topic there of like reparenting yourself and really tending to those inner child fears also that maybe are telling you like, I need this and no one is ever going to help me with that. And it's kind of time to like really address those things, because that is also like Virgo. That is this physical, mundane, tiny little detail that is actually standing in your way, while the whole time you're focusing like over there on like, oh, I need this huge thing to happen for me to take the next step towards my dream. But actually no, it's the fact that you don't believe that you deserve, or maybe you've had past experiences in which you weren't given access to that, and so that's your belief now, is that there will never be access to that. So addressing all of those parts as well. I generally feel always, but especially now, really important to remember how to self-care, to honor, hold, and love those emotions that rise to the surface. And I love this idea, this notion of healing not being a work that you do, but actually just being something that happens naturally. And your task is simply just allowing everything to unfold, your healing to unfold, and not running away from it, but actually embracing it, sitting with it, holding it, and listening to it, and allowing the natural changes to unfold in their natural time. It's not a forced act. It's actually doing less forcing and more allowing the authentic, true, healed version of yourself to actually live and make decisions and take steps without constantly being repressed and oppressed. Being trustful in that process, and also in the timing and in your own natural flow and rhythm. I want to share two last things with you. They're also kind of connected to two little anecdotes. And one of them is that I was stung by a wasp the other day. It was hiding somewhere in the cupboard and my hand was there. I didn't see it, and it just obviously got frightened and stung me. I didn't remember how much that actually hurts and like how much swelling there is, and like I got a bit scared even, because I was like, is this normal? I really don't know. Is this like an allergic reaction? But I think I'm fine. But anyways, it brought me into this whole like emotional process, and one of the realizations I'm having is like, sometimes we have to, accept and embrace that out of something bad, we can experience also something good. I read about someone who experienced a wasp stinging, and then like their chronic symptoms were like weeks after that, their chronic symptoms had decreased a lot and they didn't experience pain in other body areas. And I also recently found out that there is the poison from the bee is also actually being used to create like medicines to actually exactly heal with those things. So maybe it will turn out to be a beautiful blessing for my body, but right now I'm going through this phase where it's just so uncomfortable and I want it to stop, right? It's interesting because a lot of like indigenous cultures still know this and still remember this when they choose to work with plant medicines or also with animal medicines, such as kambo, the frog poison, where it's this really uncomfortable process and a purging that happens, but ultimately it cleanses a lot in the system, in the field, and in the energy body, and or using other plant medicines that cause really uncomfortable symptoms for an extended period of time. But ultimately the benefits, they come later, and can be very long lasting. This sense of freeing the mind, of changing perspectives, of feeling like something has been lifted out of the system, or just a lot of profound healing that can happen through really uncomfortable experiences. And I feel like that is what this eclipse is maybe about. And it's the same with other things, like money problems. Like maybe you're sitting there asking yourself, like, why am I not having this all figured out? But actually, maybe it's because you're learning to cultivate skills, to cultivate a different perspective, and to cultivate, actions that then become your skill set, your tool, and that give you a huge advantage in the long run in your life. If you look at the whole course of your life, maybe it's really good that you really have to deal with something and look at it from like the bottom up, like from the roots, and understand the roots of something, so that you really have a much more mature perspective on it. Sometimes we realize those things later on in life, but I think that it can be very healthy to also assume that we will have something beneficial coming out of this very uncomfortable situation. Not to confuse it with becoming passive and just letting something happen to you, but to understand that while you're taking steps to move yourself, that is exactly the purpose of the situation. It's for you to train those things, that ability to act, to change, to cultivate all the skills that you need to actually not be in that situation anymore. That's the whole point. And so the very last thing I want to share is, again, from this library thing yesterday. Like this was a really interesting library experience. There was also like a huge Capricorn painted inside of the hall, like hanging there. And I have 6 placements in Capricorn. So for me, that was like, yes, your place to study. Now is the time to get work done. Felt like confirmation. So there was another person working like 2 desks away from mine, and I assumed that they must be quite activistic because their whole laptop was like covered with stickers with like certain things written. And just as the library was closing and we were all packing up and leaving, I was taking a quick look at this book that I found, like a really big, beautiful picture book about witchcraft and witches, and just like reading some things that were interesting, having a little glance. And suddenly this woman walks in, and she's an elderly woman. She has gray hair. She's probably 70 or older. And she walks in and she has a cane. And she's kind of also this like witchy type of archetype. She's like hunched over a little bit. And she has this like wild something in her energy. And she just like takes these 2, I don't know if they were books or magazines or DVDs or something that was there in the library, off of the shelf, and walks over to this other person working and just like looks at them, and she's holding it up asking like, is this politics? And that person was so confused. They were like, what is the question? Like, why are you asking me this? She's like, is this politics? And he was like, no, it's medicine. Like something that was on the cover of the book or the magazine, it had to do with medicine, was like medicine journals or whatever. And she was holding it up being like, is this politics? And they were like, no, it's medicine. And then she just put it back, and then she just walked out. She just left. That was all she did. She came in, did that, and then she left. And I'm looking back down at my witchcraft book, and I'm like, wow, that was a witch. She just came in, and she just kind of made this connection, like this, ask this challenging question for our minds, like, medicine, is it politics? And this is a Virgo topic, right? Virgo is health, plants, medicine. And I mean, if you know anything about plants, then you probably are aware that most medicines are derived from plants or like animal substances, right? But a lot of it is founded from like the natural world, and yet the natural remedies, like the plants themselves, are declared by the medicinal industry, by the business corporate industry, declared as nonsense, as pseudoscience, not modern, not functioning. Depending on what country you're in, you can get sued for telling someone to use a plant to heal something, which is crazy. Because if you learn anything about like being an apothecary, making medicines, then you'll know that this stuff is made from plants. But that's the whole point. Like, it's also political. It's political. Medicine has been politicized. The body has been politicized. Everything has become political. We can't separate also the political realm from understanding, stuff about the world. So I think it was really interesting that this kind of like witchy archetype just like challenged the field like that in the moment. I thought this was very interesting. And this whole experience, yesterday of me studying all of these transits and at the same time having right next to me this interview, having all of this information just like channeled, like I'm just receiving it, I'm just hearing this conversation. It's talking exactly about the stuff that is like touched upon in all of the transits. Like the conversation was like an hour long and they talked about so much and it was so specific to the things that I was writing about astrologically, showing one way in which this full moon is appearing, Pisces and Virgo. The information of the collective, of the channels, the spiritual understanding of things, the bigger picture, that information is being spoken out and coming through very physical, material channels that are standing next to me, that I can hear and see, and that are like touching the same air in the same room. And that is Virgo. It's this very material, physical way that we are able to receive messages right now, that we are really able to understand and be aware and create new awareness, find solutions. It's very visible, it's very obvious. But because of Mercury, we do sometimes have to take some steps towards it. I needed to leave the house, get on the public transport, move somewhere, move my physical self in order to really receive. But also those people doing the interview also had to do all of that. It wasn't their home. They also needed to move, and we all needed to come into this public space, in this case the library, to really have the encounter. So allow yourself to make those movements. Allow the messages to be received. Thank you so much for listening. As I mentioned, if you enjoyed it, give it a like, share it with your friends, or subscribe to the channel. I'd be super happy to see you again. If you're in Berlin, I'm offering 2 workshops towards the end of this month. One is an introduction workshop to the art of tarot, and the other one is a workshop about embodied astrology. I'll link all the information below. I'd love to see you there. If you're not in Berlin, you can still get in touch for transformational mentoring. I offer coaching, tarot and astrology sessions, or systemic constellation, all uniquely beautiful tools to support your transformational process, to support you in connecting with the vision that you want for your life, clarity and confidence on how to get there, which action steps to take, and supporting you in really cultivating that inner trust, that inner guidance, that inner vision and confidence, that inner self-love. Lots of love from me, and I'll see you soon.